So can you all see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So our class today, basically, we are going to look at some of the basic concepts in research, things that we are going to meet. And then later on, see how we can put these into practice. So most of them you must have had before, because this is not the first time you're meeting research. So the first question is, what is research? What do we think research is? Some of you may have seen the materials that are there on Moodle. They give you an idea on what research is. Do we know what it is? What do we think about when we think of research?
Good morning, doctor.
Good morning to you.
Think it is identifying a knowledge gap, collecting data and information, analyzing it to widen the knowledge gap.
Oh, thank you, thank you. That is a really good definition. So what you've basically described is the systematic process, yeah, the systematic inquiry. And that's exactly what it is. You identify a gap, you go ahead and select a research method, and then publish the outcomes to others, make it accessible to others. So it is, again, like he said, it's concerning with seeking a solution to a problem. But as we said yesterday, this is not an organizational problem per se, or a personal problem. It's a problem that exists within a research community. And you're seeking to find meaningful answers. You're seeking to find answers to meaningful questions. So those questions would have been raised by others. Yeah. And these questions are expressed in a way that the answer you will accept as an answer. The answer is something that, the way they're expressed, the answer that you get should be responding to the question itself. So as you state your objective, take note that your objectives, which you can turn into research questions, should give you answers that overall objective. They must make a contribution to the overall objective. So take an example. If, let us say, I have a problem, maybe let's put it in the simplest terms possible. If I feel sick, I need to feel better. What will I do? First of all, I'll need to seek out a professional doctor, someone who, a medical doctor. Diagnosis will be done, and then medication prescribed. Each of those steps I've taken, seeking out medical profession, a diagnosis done, medication prescribed, and me taking the medication, will all achieve my overall objective of feeling better. So each question you pose should respond to achieving your overall objective. And you must be specific about that. Take note that you can formulate a non-meaningful question or objective. Yeah, you can't do that. So this is one of the steps that can be consuming, but the fact that you do it and do it properly Sorry, let me just. Okay, sorry, I had to mute that one. Let me also mute Catherine. There's some background noise.
Professor,
Yes.
I just had a question.
Yes, please.
Not like in yesterday's case where we were examining external factors affecting IT. Let me say, came up to a conclusion that they don't affect, external factors don't affect, let me say, implementation of IT in a company. Will that still amount to research or?
Yes, that is definitely. Whether an answer is positive or negative, you are seeking to find out if there is an effect. Is there an effect? Are there factors that affect? You find out either yes or no. Take an example. Look at imagine a scientist in a laboratory who is trying to find out if a particular drug has an effect on a particular bacteria or virus. Imagine, for example, the scientists who are doing research on the COVID virus. And as they were doing the research, I'm sure they were trying out different medications, different drug combinations to see if they had any effect. And whatever result they got, or either positive or negative, was a result they could publish to others. So another researcher here, let me not bother with this drug combination because laboratory tests or scientific tests from research ABCD have proved it doesn't work. Yeah. Patrick, sorry. So in other words, whether a result is positive or negative, it must be published. Let me also even give you an example. There was a time it was being published. There was a research that was published saying that people who demonstrated homosexual tendencies. That means a man being attracted to a man or a woman being attracted to a woman. There was research that was publishing saying that this was as a result of DNA. Yeah. So, for example, for me, if my DNA says my DNA demonstrates I'm short, I'm short. So DNA determines our size, our complexions, stuff like that. So there was some scientific research which was insinuating that people who demonstrated homosexual tendencies it was part of their DNA, and they published this research, and other researchers replicated the research, and they found this to be false. So that's one of the reasons we publish our research. You say we carried out this research and we use this research method, we carried out these steps, and these were the results. The reason for that is when somebody else decides to validate it, and especially if it's new knowledge that is coming out, relatively new knowledge, somebody else will validate it and carry out the very same steps and see if they get the same result. And several other researchers carried it out, and they found no, it was false. And that shut down that theory that homosexuality was a result of DNA. So they didn't find any gene in our DNA that drives one towards that, but rather what research has pointed out is that it's a result of a break in the psychology of somebody. It can happen at a very young age, where there's something in the psychology of somebody breaks and the person starts to get same-sex tendencies. So that's the reason for publishing. So a result, whether positive or negative, is a result that should be reported, and it contributes to the knowledge that we know. I think that we're
Excuse me, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Kindly come again on research questions and objectives. I didn't get you well. People had not muted.
Okay. So let me just get back to that question. Remember that the person who made a contribution to what is research, he said we would have identified a gap. By saying there's a gap, it means there's a question that has not yet been answered. Yeah, there's a question that has not yet been answered in a research community. So this question could be, now let's give the example of one of the articles we looked at yesterday, which was looking at groupware applications and their positive impact on communication. And the researchers were saying that in laboratory experiments, it had demonstrated that these groupware applications had a positive impact or effect on communication, but this had been done in an artificial environment. And now there was another thought. There were people thinking that if you put this within a social context, there may be forces which may affect the positive impact.
Yeah,
So they were saying that there was a positive. They were saying that there were some people who believed that there were certain forces within a social context that may negatively affect. So these people were proposing, but it had not been answered. That question had not been scientifically answered. So just as the same as the previous thought process that people with same-sex tendencies it was as a result of DNA, and that question was being asked. And a first set of researchers said, yes, it is true. But when other people replicated the same research, they said no. The answer was actually no. It was not a result of DNA. So that gap raises a meaningful question. Now, take the example of the groupware application. The question was, are there counter forces within a social context that may positively or negatively affect? Are there forces within a social context that will affect? So the researchers wanted to find out if there are those counter forces. Same thing as the people who are doing research on people with same-sex tendencies. They were trying to find out, is there a DNA link to someone experiencing same-sex attraction? Is this as a result of DNA? Yeah. So take an example. My height is a result of my DNA, whether I am short or tall. My size, my body size is a result of DNA. The shape of my face, the shape of my nose, the shape of my feet, my body shape is a result of DNA. So the question was, for somebody to have same-sex tendencies, is this a result of DNA? And several researchers carried out research. They replicated research methods, and the unanimous answer was no. This is not the case. Also, there was research, for example, which was done in both England and France to answer the question of, did all humanity come from one man and one woman? And the research came out unanimous, saying yes. From DNA scientific research, they all answered that yes, it is true, we all came from one man and from one woman. So that scientifically answered that question. So there's a meaningful question you need to answer. So the result is either yes or no. Other situations, other research questions go out to explore. Okay? they go out to explore. There's research which goes out to explore where we say it is unknown. We don't know what exists out there. Okay? We really don't know what exists out there on a particular thing. So take an example when COVID first came, it was unknown. Okay, not really, because they actually did exist. There were other COVID viruses that existed, but the particular mutation that came was relatively new. But imagine the effects of COVID. At first, it was relatively unknown. For example, how it was transmitted, how rapid it was. It could transmit. It could transmit from one person to the other. At first, things were relatively unknown. But as more research was being done and as more effects were being seen, more knowledge was being built around it. There are things that. Now, let me also give another research that was at first relatively unknown. All of you must have heard of female genital mutilation. This is basically female circumcision. When it first came, everyone unanimously agreed this is inherently evil. It's an act that should be stopped because it severely mutilates those young girls who are taken through it. It's very painful and it has adverse long-term effects. Now, when it was unanimously outlawed, but the funny thing is, this act continued to happen and continues to happen, especially done by women. So it is an act performed by women on young girls, even their own daughters. A mother willingly takes her young child through that, children as young as 6 years old. Very, very painful thing. And I even saw a documentary where a woman, someone who grew up, her mother decided not to take her through it, but she became of age and she made the decision to go ahead and do it. And then researchers couldn't understand why. So it was something relatively unknown. So there was a question of why is this thing happening? So researchers began to do when we later on begin to see research methods, they did a research method called ethnography, where they went into communities and stayed with them for long periods, just to find out why this thing was happening. And as they spent more time with the people, they began to discover that it actually made women feel they belong to a community. One woman who decided to do it at an adult age, she said she felt ostracized from her community. So she wanted to have that belonging. Another piece of research, which I can also give you as an example, which was answering the why question, there were development workers who went to West Africa. They noticed that there were women in a particular rural community who were walking long distances to fetch water. So they decided to dig a well nearby to this community. But as they observed, these women rejected using this borehole. So they spent some time they had to find out why. And as they spent more time with this community, they actually found out that these women actually used that time when they would walk long distances. They used that time to discuss amongst themselves, to find out who was eating, who ate last night, who didn't eat last night, who was beaten by the husband, things like that. So it was used as something therapeutical to them to walk those long distances. It was like a break away from any problem they might have. Another piece of research I can also tell you, another which was finding out the why question. My research interest is in ICT4D. So there was also, again, development workers who, in a rural community, put up a community radio station. So the purpose of this community radio station was to report on market prices on specific goods. So for example, let us say if it was a community that predominantly deals in maize, it would give periodic reports on the current maize prices or the current tomato prices, things like that. So what they did, apart from just putting the radio station, they also put up these loudspeakers in different parts of the community to broadcast. So when they came back to evaluate their project, they found that these loudspeakers had been vandalized. So initially, on the surface, when they did the trying to find out why, on the surface part, all the community members said, oh, we just had some bad characters, they came, destroyed this. But as they dug deeper, they found out that community members actually themselves, these are the ones who vandalized. And they found out the reasons why. They said, we got tired of listening to market prices. We also want to listen to find out on our latest soap, like for us here at home here, we watch Pearl Magic Prime, we watch the Ugandan soaps, Prestige, Beloved. We want to find out what happened to Suvi, to Sanyu, things like that. So the community also, they also said, we don't want to keep listening to market prices. There are other things we want to listen to. If there is a soap and an Indian soap, we want to hear what happened to this character, things like that. So those were answering. Now that's where we have the meaningful questions. You have the positivist questions, which answer something, whether it's true or false. Then we have phenomenology, where we want to do more discovery. So those.
Excuse me, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Can a meaningful question translate into a research problem?
Now, the research problem is where the meaningful question rises from. Jimmy, have you understood? So that it starts with a research problem, then from that research problem, a question arises.
Okay.
Yeah. So have I answered the question of meaningful question? So the answer should be acceptable to respond to the meaningful question. If it's a why is this thing happening? That's a discover exploratory, we're trying to explore. If it is a what question, or rather a causal effect, what does this cause this, yes or no? That's a positivist question. We shall look more on positivism and phenomena. We shall look at this, the discovery, where something is relatively new and we are trying to discover, and then where something is not necessarily new, but we want to ascertain yes or no. So if those who looked at especially the IS articles, the two IS articles were pointing to these two. One is positivism, the other is a phenomena. Yeah, we shall see this in more detail. Let's see in the chat. Okay, so I thought there was a question there. So do we have any question on any more questions on meaningful questions?
Doctor, yes, about the meaningful questions. So I just wanted to know if we can derive meaningful questions from the research communities.
Yes, they are.
Or we get to eventually find them.
Now, normally,
okay,
Ruth, that's a really good question. Normally, we get our research problem from somebody else's research. Normally, at the end of somebody's research, they usually put up propositions. Either they will put up limitations. So, take an example. Someone will say, this research went up to this point. So beyond this point, we are not sure if this is true or false. So take an example. If a research was a phenomena, something that was being discovered. Yeah, something that is being discovered. Normally, the researcher the researcher or researchers will put forward propositions saying, this probably means this. This probably means this. Another researcher can say, let me ascertain further if this is true. Let me replicate this research in a similar context and see if I get similar results. And once the results may be affirmed, and then a third researcher also does the same thing, this becomes a truth. Yeah? So it becomes a research question for several researchers until when several researchers prove the same thing, then it becomes a truth. You remember I gave you the example of research that was done on same-sex tendencies. So a first group of researchers put forward a proposition that same-sex tendencies in a person is probably as a result of DNA. So this became a research question for other researchers, and they became a research question saying, is this really true? And they replicated the research in several other researches, and the result was no, it's not. So that meaningful question came from somebody else's research. So the first person put it forward as a proposition. So when others repeated it, replicated, and it said no. Now, it doesn't say the other person's research was invalid, no. It brought forward some result, whether it was negative or positive, as long as the person followed a systematic inquiry, it is okay. Now, I'll give you an example. Like my research was more or less a phenomena because it was relatively new. Somebody else can decide to say, let me look at Dr. Sheba's propositions and replicate the same research. Do I get the same results? Your results may show, no, that's not the case. It doesn't mean my research, they'll come and strip me of my PhD. No, they will not, because I still followed a systematic inquiry. My results may have been false, but I still followed a scientific process. Just that your research either validated or did not validate, as long as you followed the same scientific process. So my research, you derived your meaningful questions from my research, from what I proposed. Have I answered your questions?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I joined a bit late. I joined a bit late. I was trying to organize myself. So does it mean that a meaningful question is actually determined after another research is conducted to confirm that?
Yeah, remember that's why even yesterday when we were discussing, we said a research problem is identified from a research community. So there would be that research community would have published proposing something or stating that there could be something in this phenomena that we have not yet discovered. So, for example, the article of Groupware, the researchers started from a point where people, a certain research community was saying that there are probably social counter forces that may affect the positive effects of groupware. But because other research had focused on laboratory, it was relatively unknown. So because of that proposition other people were stating, these researchers decided to put that to the test and test this in a social environment. So it came as so that's where it starts from a research community. That's the connection we talked about yesterday. Have I answered your question, Patrick?
Yes, Doctor. You have answered.
So we want to look at several things in this class. We want to look at research philosophy and different research approaches. We shall not look at strategy in detail. We shall look at it in another class, but strategy is basically methods. Yeah. And how you can decide to combine approaches. We shall also look at credibility. Yeah. How we can validate our research. And then maybe look at research ethics. Yeah? So different research approaches. We've already started to see some of it when we're looking at meaningful questions. This is what is referred to as a research onion. There are layers we peel through in order to clearly state our research process, that systematic inquiry. The most important thing you can do in your research is indicate that you've followed the scientific method. That's the most important thing. Your research should, a scientist is said to be objective. Whether you get a positive answer or negative, that's the objectivity of research. Objectivity of research, that you don't have a predetermined answer. If you're saying, I already know the answer, then that's not research. It's an inquiry. So it should be a systematic inquiry. It should have followed a scientific process. And that's the guiding force of the research onion. You start by identifying your research philosophy. We have two diverse research philosophies, the positivist approach and phenomenology. Two completely differing. Then there is an in-between there. We shall also look at it. From the research approach, it guides you on, your research philosophy, it guides you on your approach. If you're going to follow a deductive or inductive approach, or in other words, is this going to be qualitative or quantitative? Then there's also a case where you combine the approaches. This then guides your research method or strategy. This is the third layer that we see. Then if your research is longitudinal or cross-sectional, then we have our data collection tools or methods. One of the things we mistake is we mistake research methods for research strategies. Data collection methods for research methods. These are two different things. The data collection method is the very last inner circle, but the research method is a really key point in our research, very, very key point. And selection of the appropriate research method is key, really key. So our research question guides whether our research is positivist or a phenomenon, or a combination of the two. It guides our research approach, it guides the method, the research method we select. Really, it's a key point. And there should be something appropriate, an appropriate thread seen throughout. So let's start with the research philosophy. Now, with the research philosophy, you have what we see many times as two warring camps. And it normally gets very, very political in this case. As IT students, I know you must have seen the war between open source and proprietary, the open source movement versus licensed softwares. I'm sure you've seen that war. It goes beyond technology. Yeah, it becomes political, quite political in many ways. I actually found out at a certain point, I remember I went for an open source sort of seminar, workshop kind of thing, retreat. It was a kind of retreat. many years back. And I remember during this this thing, there was an Egyptian couple, man and woman, and they later on, just a few years back, I found this man was very active in the Arab Spring that happened in Egypt. And even I remember when there were presentations being made, there was an insinuation that Microsoft was supporting corrupt dictatorial governments in Egypt and in Kenya and so on and so forth. It was a very political war. It went beyond technical. It became very political. So there's also a kind of similar camps, where there are those who believe positivism is supposed to be was more objective than phenomenology. Yeah, there are those warring camps that we see existing there. But however, just to say that there is no, it all depends on the question you're trying to answer. So I gave you the example of female genital mutilation. If you took a positivist approach, there was no way you're going to discover why a woman would take her young daughter through such a painful process, or why a young woman who was educated would choose to go ahead and have it done on her, no matter how painful it was, unless somebody took a qualitative approach, or to take it as a phenomena that really required exploration. There was no way a simple questionnaire or survey would answer that question. No way. It needed somebody to take time to answer. That was the logic. What's the logic? How do you reason? How do we reason out this thing? Then the ethics part of it, how should we act? As far as this question is concerned, what is the most ethical way we can get a correct answer about a particular study? How do we get to know this thing? And then ontology, what is being studied? Is this an independent reality? So take an example. When we're looking at positivism, if it's an independent variable that we can determine, just an independent variable that can be clearly determined. Take an example. If we were trying to find out the performance of girls versus the performance of boys in secondary school in mathematics, a simple study of aggregated data could give us that answer without objectively. Or to study maybe the rate of HIV infection between men and women in urban populations and versus rural populations. A simple aggregated study of aggregated data would give you a positivist answer. The rate of infection. Simple study. But however, if we're studying a reality of a social construct, for example, like female genital mutilation, what is the reality of a woman that lives in a community where all women have been circumcised and you're the only one who hasn't been circumcised? Imagine what's the tribe in the east where men are circumcised? Is it the Bagisu?
Yes.
Yeah.
The
So
Bagisu, yes.
imagine the reality of a young man who has not been circumcised. What is his reality? Is it just a question of health, or it is a question of I'm a man, I must be seen as a man amongst men? What is his reality? How does he feel?
It's a question of belonging.
So it's a reality. So that's where it becomes a social construct. So now when we're studying a phenomena, it's a social construct. We're trying to understand the reality of someone, which I may not, maybe me as a Mtoro, I may not understand what a Sebei woman is going through if she has not been circumcised. I may not understand it. To me, it doesn't make any sense why that woman is doing it. But for her, it's a reality. So I cannot understand by simply giving a survey. I must take time to sit with that person and understand their reality. Whereas on the positivist side, it's just an independent variable. I'm trying to find out what's the rate of infection. I just simply get aggregated data from different healthcare facilities, input some mathematical statistical calculations, and I find out the rate of infection.
Yes, can I interrupt you, doctor, there?
Yes, please.
Yeah, can we then say that positivism is when the answer is already done, it's just about determining now? Okay.
So we'll actually even see, when we look at qualitative versus quantitative, we shall even see the research questions, how they begin, and how it determines whether this research is going to be qualitative or quantitative. Is it going to be positivist or is it going to be a phenomena? Those kinds of things. So as much as the different researchers want to point out the evil of one over the other, it really isn't the case. There isn't one case is greater than the other. It all depends on what it is how can I rightfully study this thing and give it a meaningful answer.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yes, please.
Sorry to take you back. Is it rightful to deduce that positivism is a little bit simplistic?
We could say that there are some questions which require a simplistic answer. Let me give you an example. On the IT side, have any of you heard about the term theory, or the term framework, or the term theory?
Yes.
So this is a theory that has been, by the time it was developed, it means it has been, this is a research that has been validated over and over again. So one of it puts forward certain, should I say, truths. So for example, it says, the term theory says, a system will be adopted, or an ICT artifact will be adopted if, one, it is perceived to be useful, and two, it is perceived to be easy to use. Yeah. So therefore, it means if a system or application has been developed, a researcher or an ICT profession ICT professions can easily determine if it will be adopted or not by simply measuring usefulness and ease of use. Those two, measuring usefulness and ease of use. So it's very simplistic in those terms. Then term even goes further and says that a female user will adopt a system easily if they perceive it easy to use, and a male user will adopt it if they perceive it to be useful. Just using those. And then there are other theories which even go further and give even more variables. So in that sense, it simplifies the issue of adoption, whether something has been adopted, can be adopted, or should be easily adopted or not. So we could imagine, for example, in groupware, that was the approach that was taken in laboratory experiments. However, On the more in-depth side, when you place this artifact in the complex social context of an organization, you find organizational politics come in. Yeah, that remember now the action research. They found that the IT department, because they had not been included from the beginning, organization politics came in, and IT said, we shall not support. Yeah, that is a complex social reality. Whereas the positivist side simply measures adoption in terms of usability and usefulness. The phenomena side looks at a complex social reality. You have not included me in this project from the beginning, therefore I will not participate. I will not support. So the phenomena picks out realities that positivists will not pick out. But the positivist side also picks out objective variables. It measures certain, there must be measure. With positivism, we shall see later, there must be measurement. This is where already it preempts. You see this part? There must be a measurement. Measurable evidence. Whereas when we look at the phenomenology side, we are painting a picture of a reality that is not necessarily yours. It's not your reality as a researcher. Yeah, you're bringing out descriptions. Here, I'll give you an example I'll give you, let's say, a practical example for the research I was doing. So I was doing research in a rural context, looking at applying an mHealth application in a rural context. And I remember one of the things I was doing, I remember one particular situation. I spent a good time. I used ethnography actually as one of my research methods. So I spent about 2 years with this rural community. Okay, I didn't necessarily live with them, but it was a healthcare community. It was made up of VHTs, that's called a village health team, village health teams in full. So these VHTs are just ordinary community members who are given basic training on healthcare. For example, some provide basic healthcare to children under 5 on things like malaria, diarrhea, and cough. So just ordinary community members. So there was an mHealth application that was being implemented in this community, and then I was looking at sustainability. So I was looking for things within the community that may affect positively or negatively on sustainability. So I remember one of the things, I remember one of the first things I remember one of my first encounters as we were meeting this community. So of course, it's a rural community. When you are meeting them, it was with some donor development workers. So these community members were pointing out their hardships. So I remember these VHTs were saying we don't have bicycles. We were given bicycles at a certain time. These bicycles broke down. So I remember there was a lady. She was a white lady, I remember. And on the side, she came complaining. She was saying, look at these people. Look at this man complaining. He has a motorcycle here, but he wants to be given a bicycle. So I remember at first I got I'll put in quotes what I would call a biased thought, saying she's right. Then another thought came in as a researcher. That thought said, you know what, Sheba, this is not your reality. It is their reality. So I had to forego my bias. I had to put aside my bias of these people are just looking to squeeze money out of the development, the agents. the development workers, they're trying to squeeze more money. But the truth is, they, as community members, they had their reality. It wasn't my reality, it was their reality. They were being appointed to do healthcare work within their community. They also felt they were entitled to bicycles. And I think those I don't know if among you there is anyone who is involved in any of this work. I think right now they've started paying VHTs. Before it was seen as voluntary work, free work, but right now I think government has actually started paying them. So this was their reality. And as a researcher, I had to report directly the reality I saw. So my narration I had to get rid of my thoughts to give an accurate description of what the reality of these people was. So I don't know if now we see a clear difference between the two, phenomenology and positivism.
Yes, but doctor, how would you, I don't know, what about the question of perception? Does it fall under the phenomenon or?
Yes, okay. Now also positivism can also get perception. So for example, if you are trying to determine the to rate an application as if its ability to be adopted, you would be getting the perception of users on usefulness and usability. That would be still be getting perception. In phenomenology, we are getting perception, but also getting beyond perception. We're also trying to understand the reality, the reality in which your participant is experiencing. What is their reality? What is their perception? What is their reality? Okay. Now, for example, I may be the person. I may be thinking the perception of this person is that they should be getting a bicycle, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that because it's not just about getting a bicycle. They are providing a full-time service to a community. Surely they have entitlement. That is their reality. Even if they were voted in, that is their reality. Just mute Philip there. Okay. Yes,
Doctor,
please. Yes, please.
Is it also right to say that positivism is research majorly in a more controlled environment where someone studies a particular variable versus another variable,
yes,
without entirely considering the overall environment?
Exactly.
Yet feminism looks at the reality in the world and is not looking at a single variable, but looking at the entire outlay of something.
Yes, that is 100% correct. Thank you so much, Tom. You've really specified it very well. Now,
is it also true?
Yes, please.
Is it also true to say that feminism is looking at a research problem in an essence that okay, yes, phenomenon means something new, but in something that it has not been thought about, something that is unique, something that has not been discussed about, something that is coming out new. Yet positivism is looking at ideas that have been probably discussed and left hanging by phenomenism.
Yes, that is true. That is extremely true. Tom is bringing out some really key points, and thank you for that, Tom. And we shall see that later on. We shall see over time the phenomena becomes something that is, when it is researched and it's affirmed, it develops into theory. which then now later with time now a positivist approach can be taken, because now it has been studied and many things have now been seen to be true. So take an example, term. I'm sure it was several research which was done to later to determine things that affect adoption, and that developed the theory of term and many other theories. So we can see that phenomena is the beginning of development of theory, while positivism is validating or not validating, sorry, it is testing theory.
You have said it now. You have now answered all the questions.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, so that is essentially it. So that's it in a nutshell. So this then leads to the approach, the research approach. You'll see things like deductive or inductive, or qualitative or quantitative. You see here the word test hypothesis. Yeah. So a theory is putting forward several hypotheses. For example, term puts forward a hypothesis. Usefulness leads to adoption. Ease of use leads to adoption. A female user is more inclined to...
But you people... But yes, 50% of men...
Sorry. So,
Doctor,
yes, please.
I didn't hear well that last explanation of victimism and phenomenism.
Which one in particular?
The one where is it Mr. Patrick said that you have answered the thing. My headsets were not okay. I didn't hear very well.
Let me try to remember what I said. Sometimes I say so many things that... Okay, I said...
Sorry.
Yes, sir. Sorry, no, it's okay. I said, usually phenomena is the beginning of the development of a theory.
Yes.
It's starting where you are developing an understanding of something. So a theory is being developed. Then positivism, we are testing a theory, an established theory, or we're now testing it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. So, but now, of course, not all research is that diverse. There's some research which is in between, just in between there, and may not necessarily be the development of a theory. It may be just the beginning of it, or it could be something that is giving further explanation on something. We shall see some few examples as we go ahead. So when we come from positivism and phenomenology, we then come to the approach. And here, this is where we emphasize the point of testing. Yeah. In deductive or quantitative research, a theory has already been developed, like term, for example. And term puts forward several presumptions or it states several things which begs a researcher to test. For example, I gave you one of them which said a female user is more inclined to ease of use. A male user is more inclined to ease of or to usefulness. So a researcher can say, let's test this hypothesis. Let me test this hypothesis. Let me test this hypothesis maybe among certain age group, among a certain age demographic of users and social media. Is this the case? That people are inclined to ease of use? Let's say someone will test this between TikTok and what's the other one? Instagram. Do we have more male users on TikTok than female users? And is it true that it's because of its ease of use? Another person can say, let me test this on e-learning platforms, since now after COVID, we've had several e-learning tools being used on e-learning platforms. So we shall test. Is this about, do we have a greater perception of female users not adopting or using it something more frequently because of ease of use or usefulness? Someone can decide to test that hypothesis. Yeah, that's a positivist approach. And then they would come up with a measurement that maybe there's a higher rate amongst female users or lower rate of use of Moodle, and maybe a higher rate in Zoom, but lower rate in maybe WhatsApp platforms for discussions or things like that. Then the inductive or qualitative or phenomenology philosophy brings in the inductive approach, where we collect data with the aim of starting to develop a theory or an understanding. So the theory essentially is to have an understanding about something. So inductive is we're collecting data to understand. We don't understand, we want to understand. That's beginning the developing of a theory. We are beginning to understand. So this slide basically explains further the testing of theory. If a theory is true, we say X will occur. Then we test it out. X does occur, which supports the theory. X does not occur, which challenges the theory. Okay, so maybe results of a certain study show there was female users are more inclined to using Zoom than using Moodle, while the male users are more inclined to using Moodle than Zoom. They prefer it. So someone will say, okay, let me test term. Is it because one is more useful or one is considered ease of use? And then somebody carries out a study, a survey question, getting the perception of different users and whether they will determine if X is true, whether it supports or X is not, and challenges. Then another person will say, okay, let me use phenomenology to uncover other things that maybe there was, it's an issue of finances. The female users maybe have more money than male users who prefer going to Moodle to a previous recording or things like that. So hypothesis is getting a relationship between two concepts. Okay? Between two concepts. Technology ease of use, technology adoption. Two concepts. Now, as I said, these words, I'm sure some of you have heard of a thing called conceptual framework. Has anyone ever heard of the word, heard about conceptual framework?
Yes, yes, Doctor.
So normally, in a quantitative study, we expect to see a conceptual framework. Normally, in a qualitative research, we expect to see a conceptual framework. Okay? So normally, it's normally a situation, and many times I find students write a proposal, and you can see somebody's work is clearly qualitative in nature. It's where you're going out to discover, but somebody has a conceptual framework. And that's already a contradiction. So one needs to be careful. Okay? So hypothesis, you're testing two or more concepts. You're trying to determine a causal relationship between two or more concepts. So that's usually where you use measurement to determine a relationship. So Deductive starts from a well-defined theory, something that is accepted as theory, as truth. From that theory, you develop a hypothesis. You test that hypothesis and you observe, and then you confirm. Yeah? You confirm. So using, once you collect data, which is normally quantitative data, measurable data, you take it through a statistical analysis and you confirm whether there is a direct causal relationship or there is a minimal causal relationship from statistical data. So the reverse is true for induction or qualitative research. So here is an example. What is the experience of using a particular e-learning system during COVID? Here you may ask students, what happened? What was your experience of it? Maybe one student may tell you, oh, you know what, I used it at that time. I was in the village. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have anything. This was something new to me. I'll just give you an example. I remember when I think Makerere was one institution that was very, very negative about going online. So in that time, I remember when COVID came, I was here in the village, and in the village we have a neighbor, a young man who's a neighbor. He's a student at Makerere University. I think he's graduating actually. And this is a young man, really, where I'm deep, myself, I'm really deep in the village, really deep in the village. So this is a place where we don't have running water, we don't have power, and most of my neighbors are really, it's a really rural community. So this young man did not even have a smartphone. So when eventually Makerere, I think after the second lockdown, when we had that terrible, terrible outbreak and many people were dying, after that, Makerere decided to go online. And this young man, actually, how I got to know him, he was a plucker, plucking tea on our estate, and that's how he made actually his school fees. This young man did not even have a smartphone. So when Makerere went online, one of the first things he did was he had to buy a smartphone. So I remember he started plucking. So at a certain point, he came and asked me for an advance so he could buy the smartphone, which I would then deduct off his pay as he was plucking. So you can imagine if you interviewed him as a student, what his reality is. It's very different from a student a university student who was in Kampala, from a middle-class family, and his or her parents could actually even afford to get a router, put for that person bundles, buy for them the latest smartphone, and not only that, even buy for them a laptop, all of that. Yet this young man, the only thing he could do was pluck to get that smartphone. So this boy's reality was completely different from another person's reality. Same thing with the teacher, with the lecturers. My reality as an ICT profession is very different from the reality. For example, we have some professors at Makerere, at UMU, who are quite elderly. They're quite elderly, really professors quite elderly. When now going online, it's a completely different reality from, let's say, my case. Going online to teach students whom you don't see is a completely different reality. I remember when I started teaching at UMU, that is many years back, and we were using projectors. And for me, I remember it was a wonderful technology to use. But I remember there was this professor, I think, I don't know if she's still alive. She was called Professor Haflet, a religious sister from America. She really didn't like projectors. She didn't understand this whole movement of moving from one slide to the next. So you see, realities really differ. Really differ. So trying to get those realities from different users, or people from different universities. The reality of Makerere University is very different from the reality of Uganda Matters. If a lecturer at Makerere could simply say, I will not teach online, I simply reject. Why? Because the reality of a Makerere lecturer is very different from a reality from a Uganda Matters University lecturer. If I don't have students in a class, I cannot get a salary. A lecturer on government pay, whether they teach or not, government will still pay. Our realities are completely different. So that is inductive research. Here we are trying to interpret the world according to the person experiencing the reality. Not according to you, the researcher, according to the person experiencing the reality. Even there are certain times where a participant in a certain reality, you can't experience it. There was a man who decided to go to prison to understand the reality of being in prison. And when he was talking to an actual convict, the convict told him that, you know what, you can't understand what I'm going through, because for you tomorrow you're going to go out. Me, I'm going to stay here. So, and that was true. If I just go and stay in a prison for a month, it's not the same thing as somebody who is going to live there for the rest of their lives, or maybe for 30 years, who is in prison for 30 years, or for life imprisonment, or one who is on death row. That reality, I cannot experience it. So you really need to report the reality of the one experiencing it as is. You need to narrate the story as the person who is living in that reality feels. You remember when I gave you the example when I was researching, when I had to stop myself, my bias as Sheba, and say, this is not my reality. I need to report the reality of this person experiencing it. That becomes the objectivity of a researcher. By the way, another key point we shall talk about is objectivity of a researcher. You really need to be as objective as possible. As objective as possible. Side is asking, am I right to say that deductive is individualism more based on already known data, while inductive is collective? Participants, yes, you're very right. You're right on that side, extremely right. Now, on the part of objectivity of the researcher, I just want to give you an example on objectivity. One time I was participating in a seminar for PhD candidates, and these PhD candidates were presenting more or less their work so far. And I remember two particular cases. There was one particular case, there was a lady who was, this was some years back. There's a lady presenting, she was doing research on the issue of land that had been occupied by Buganda from Bunyoro Kingdom. So those who may know the history, I think there was land that was taken from Bunyoro and given to Buganda by the colonial rulers. So as the lady was presenting, you could see visibly, I don't know what tribe she was, I don't remember, but you could see visibly this was an emotional thing to her. So as when she finished the presentation, the audience, some members of the audience said that I think it's best you change your topic, because they said you can see visibly this affects you emotionally. You could see visibly she was affected. So that obviously meant her results were going to be biased. A second researcher, I remember it was this man, I think this was a black man Obviously, from his accent, he lived in America. So his research was, he was trying to use, I think, the culture of storytelling in Africa to determine the origin of mankind, to prove that human beings started from Africa, and it was the Black African. So I remember, even as he was justifying his research, he was saying, you know, they, the white, try to, you know, prove that civilization began with them. They, using those words, they. So I remember also the same thing happened. People said, how valid will your results be, especially you being Black from the US, where there's an obvious divide between Black and white. So how validated do you think your findings will be? Don't you think there's an obvious bias considering that you're Black? And obviously he was trying to, you could see his validation why he was trying to interpret, to carry out his research, is to prove that, you know, they say we are beneath them. There's an obvious divide between they, the white, and we, the Blacks. So how valid is your research? So there was a clear lack of objectivity. So as a researcher, your biases you yourself must check yourself to ensure that you are as objective as possible. So inductive research basically says context matters. We simply cannot pick a small group of people and give a positivist answer. They say context matters, context affects. So essentially, that is the approach that was taken by the action research on the groupware application. They were saying context matters. Can we look at context? Find out why X is happening. We don't just want to determine that X happens, but why does it happen? Why does it happen? Having a further understanding. So inductive, the opposite happens. We start with observation. From the observation, a pattern is developed. Then from there, a tentative hypothesis and then theory is developed. Now, normally we find in initial research, qualitative research, we point out the patterns when we put forward what we call propositions. We're saying, we are seeing pattern A, B, C, D happening. Then somebody else will say, let me put this in a similar context. Do I find the same pattern? And then a third person, certain pattern is happening. Then from there we say a tentative hypothesis is proposed by another researcher. And when this tentative hypothesis is continuously proved true, a theory is developed. So far, do we make sense?
Yes, Doctor.
I suggest we stop here before going to other theories. I suggest we stop here. Let's pick on this next week. We move deeper into the onion so that we don't get lost. Because these concepts, research concepts, are really, really important when we're starting to develop our concept notes and then eventually our proposals. May I suggest we stop here for now?
Yes, Doctor. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're most welcome. I'm going to put up both recordings of yesterday and today. I'm going to pass them on to ICT, then put them up on Moodle, including these lecture slides.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Okay. Do we have
Thank
any
you, Doctor.
parting question or concerns?
Yeah, yes, doctor. I was thinking aloud. A pattern and the hypothesis. What is the distinction?
Okay.
Because
Now, a pattern, take an example. I'll give an example. My research was highly qualitative. I identified several patterns. Another person will say, let me use Dr. Sheba's research and see if I can determine the same patterns. If that person finds maybe some to be seen, others not, they report them. But several patterns will be identified. Then a third person will say, let me also put this in a similar context. So take an example, my research was done in India. Another person will say, let me do the same research in Kenya in a rural community. Another person will say, let me do it in northern Uganda. Several patterns have been pointed out. Therefore, those patterns, somebody else can say, this can be a tentative hypothesis. And they say, let me test this. Is it true this causes this? Making it now more quantitative in nature. Then if several people do it and it proves true, it then becomes a hypothesis which then develops into a theory. I don't know, Patrick, if I answer your question.
yeah, I've got it, doctor.
Yeah.
I've got it now.
Yeah. Do you have any other question or concern?
Yeah, yes, doctor.
Yes, Andrew.
I wanted to inquire what in the ICT world, what is usually considered quantitative or qualitative with the researches we are going to?
Now, that's a good question. Number one, it depends on what it is you're researching. It depends. Let's start it. Everything starts from your research problem. Everything starts from your research problem. I have seen both approaches being taken. I've seen a student who has taken a quantitative approach, purely quantitative. I've seen those who have taken purely qualitative. I've seen those who have mixed the two. I can't tell you one takes over the other. Everything is determined by your research problem. Everything is determined by your research problem. I would rather say, let's start by correctly identifying a research problem than correctly identifying a research question. That's what I would tell you, to be purely scientific.
Thank you, doctor.
You're welcome. Any other?
Doctor.
Yes, please, Tom.
Is it the same case in IS?
Yes, it can also be the same thing in IS.
Okay, doctor, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm looking at the research when it comes to masters and the master's student.
Yes.
Is it under normal circumstance for master's student to do a qualitative research?
Is it normal? You're saying is it
yeah, is it normal? Is it is it of course it's acceptable, but is it okay considering the timelines?
Now it depends on the qualitative research you're doing. There again, it depends on the research question. There are research questions that don't require a lengthy period of time. There are those research questions that don't. If you're doing qualitative, my suggestion to you is it's not how wide, but how deep you can go. If you can find as much data as possible, for example, you may have observed something over time. There may be a lot of documentation that you can pick from. Then go ahead and do it. But if not, try the mixed method approach. Yeah, if it's a time thing, try the mixed method approach. The mixed method approach helps you cover both bases quickly. You carry out some interviews, some observations, then give a questionnaire so that you have data from both sides. But then again, it all depends on your research question. Picking, of course, an appropriate research question where you can get the maximum amount of data is the best thing you can do. If you know you don't have the time to maybe spend a lot of time with the community, then take a mixed method approach, where both your survey questionnaire is equivalent to your interviews and observation. So that way, you pick a maximum amount of data within the shortest amount of time. Tom, have I answered your question?
Loud and clear.
Okay.
Doctor, this is Nicholas.
Yes, Nicholas.
Learned today that multiple hypotheses that have been used or tested or let me say derived and worked well could become a theory. But I wanted to hear something from you in regard to after if your research journey is maybe complete, you've made your contribution. At what point a theory turn into, let me say, a fact? Because in your submission, I've enjoyed something to do with your theory today might become someone else's building line for their hypothesis.
Exactly.
So at what point does this theory become a fact and the researcher knows that I concluded this?
You saw the pattern of growth from inductive. You saw the pattern of growth. Research builds upon research. Remember, there's a research community. The research I started built on somebody else's research. Then another person will add on. And the more that is known, the more quantitative it becomes, and therefore it becomes a theory. So research is built upon research. It's not you that develops the theory, but it is a research community that develops the theory.
Understood, yes.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions, concerns? Let me see in the chat room if there's anything else. Someone asked, is the research approach first and the research question? No, we have the research question first. The research problem is the first. Yeah, the research problem is the first, and from there we determine what is my research question. Then my research question determines what is my approach. We shall see later, especially when we look at qualitative versus quantitative, we shall see the research questions that emerge, which determine the approach that we're actually taking. So, Alan, it's a process we go through. It's not, we don't have clear-cut answers. It's a process we go through. That's the scientific process.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any other question or concern?
I don't think so.
Okay, okay.